about Agnon because last year we did that. Here we have Shmuel Yosef Agnon, who was born on the 18th of the month of Av, August, 1888. But he said he was born on the 9th because the Mashiach, the Messiah, is, according to Jewish tradition, will be born on that day. So Agnon just a little bit changed his date of birth because he was very modest. Let's start with that. He is the only Israeli author who won the Nobel Prize with Nelly Sachs in 1966. And here we are. This is my husband, Gadi, and he is great at just doing that. That's the exercises he gets every morning almost. So here we are, Agnon at the Nobel Prize in ceremony. And what is unique about Agnon, there are many things, but one of the most important things is, next. Okay, his language and the way he looks at the sources. His work is always laced with the Jewish sources, be it rabbinical, the Torah, the prophets, the Mishnah, Midrashic, etc., etc. So there are always more than one layer in his work. And we are going to see it even in the love story, which is considered a very modern love story. We will see how he's doing that, because he does not look upon himself as a writer. He looks upon himself as a sofer, a scribe, whose mission in life is to preserve Jewish heritage. And that's why he says in one of his stories, Chush Hareach, the sense of smell, that he prefers someone who is not Jewish, who writes in Hebrew, to all the Hebrew scholars who write in English. He hated scholars. He hated academics in general. He had some feud with them, but that's another story. We're not going to talk about that today. So what we are going to do today is look at his story, Panim Aherot, or Metamorphosis, which is one of his love stories. He wrote several love stories, and his attitude towards women, love, and marriage is quite complex. And we will see only one facet, one way he looks at love and marriage in one of his stories. He has stories in which the husband is so jealous about his wife that they have to divorce finally because he can't stand the fact that she loved someone before him. That's called the doctor's divorce, Harofeu Gushato. In Fahrenheit, a man goes to the front, and when he comes back, he finds out that his wife left with another man, and the doorman says to him, after the baby died, he didn't know he had a son, he didn't know that he died, and life in general in Agnon's work is very interesting and complicated. In Sipur Pashut, a simple story, the guy falls in love. Guy Herschel falls in love with his cousin. She's not exactly a cousin, a distant cousin, Bluma. And his mother doesn't like the idea because she's poor and she works as a servant, a maid in their home. So she marries him off to another woman who is very, very affluent, very rich. And each time he smells her, he gets a headache, etc., etc. And he has a nervous breakdown, but he lives happily ever after. So the story we're going to deal with today, Panim Aherot, which was translated as Metamorphosis, which is a problem, the translation itself, was first published in 1932 in the newspaper Devar. And then he rewrote it and published it in 1948. And there were very many changes between the two versions. For instance, in the dream, I hope all of you read the story, in the dream, in the first version, he says, and I attribute what I wrote right now to Freud, because he knew Freud, he knew his theory, and I went to see Agnon's library in Jerusalem, and he had a lot of books about psychology. He was a great psychology reader and student. In the first version of the story, Tony was much more intellectual, was much more brainy. In the second one, she's all heart and very little brain, if you want to put it that way. We maybe have time to discuss why he did it. I don't know, but we might have come up with some ideas. In the second version, appeared in a collection called Elu Ve'elu, These and Those, and it was reprinted in 1953 in a new collection called Al Kapot HaMan'ul, At the Handle of the Lock. Let's take a look at the first version. That's what it looked like. And remember, it's 1932. And 1932, to write such a story was quite something new. Very, very innovative, very new, very, very unconventional in its outlook. Okay, let's go on.
Looks like the poet's
Okay. Now, the Hebrew title, which is Panim Aherot, has so many meanings that Metamorphosis can't catch it. Panim Aherot can be a different face, another face. It could be face of others. It could be a new meaning. It could be face of other women. It has so many multiple meanings that the word metamorphosis doesn't catch it and won't be able to catch it because it only puts the light on the change. Is there a change or is there not a change? Now, the story is based upon the Torah, and in the Torah we find the following. When a man has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, according to Jewish religion, only the man can initiate the get, the divorce, not the woman, whether she likes it or not. Because he has found some uncleanliness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand. It's very important. He must give it in her hand and send her out of his house. So the entire Metamorphosis story is based upon this verse from the Bible.
Distasteful something.
That's King James Version. It's quite old. I don't know exactly. יש לנו כפול. Okay. Now, before going in further into the story, Jewish oral law, Sanhedrin, says that when a man divorces his first wife, even an altar sheds tears. כשאדם מגרש אשתו ראשונה, אפילו מזבח מוריד עליו דמעות. And we have this layer in the story itself. Let's go on. איך זה קרה כל הזמן? דבי, כל הזמן זה קורה זה חוזר על עצמו. לא, לא, לא. Okay. Now, the get, the procedure. This is very important. It must be written in a very specific way. If it's not written in that way, then it's pasul. It's not kosher, and there is no get. There is no bill of divorcement. Now, there is a precise formula which changes from one couple to another. It must be a specific one. You can't take something that was pre-written and use it. It must be written by a scribe. And it must be overseen by a rabbi to make sure that everything is okay. Okay, let's go on. Okay. This is what the get looks like, what a get looks like. And once the get is given to the woman, the husband says, Harei at muteret lechol adam. You are hereby free to marry any man. Now again, the English doesn't do justice to the word muteret, which is a terrible word, which is not only you are free, but you are released. You may go, even unleashed, you go out of this prison. And this is a typical get document. Now, let's go on. Okay, once the couple is divorced, they are not allowed to be together anymore. Look at our Hartman and Tony. Something is going on here. Because the sages were afraid that the old intimacy might take over, and God forbid, this couple that know themselves, each other so well, they might, God forbid, go to bed together. And that's something that shouldn't be done. Just, I'll remind you, because we're going to see that, they are going to be in the same inn for the night, and that's very complicated. Okay. Now, Panim Aherot, Metamorphosis. What do we have here? We have a story that starts at the end. We start with a divorce. We don't start with how they met, how they got acquainted, how they went out together. We start at the end of the marriage. אני חושבת שאתה מסתיר לווילי. You're okay with him? He's not? You're with? Okay.
No problem.
Okay. The entire story is one day. That's it. It starts when they go out from the rabbi's home, from the judicial court, Jewish court, and they go out of the city, and they eat, and they go to sleep. Not together. Not together. There are two main characters in the story. One that is very round, I'll explain what it means, and one that is very flat. A round figure is someone that we learn about his life, about his inner thoughts, about the way he acts. He is a very round figure. The other one is more like one-dimensional figure. Thank you. Tony, in the second version of the story, not in the first one, is very one-dimensional.
Which version did we read?
The second.
Second.
The first one was never translated. Only Hillel Barzel in his book 1985 did translate parts of it and show the difference between the two. Okay? We read the second version. So she is not, she is more flat. She's one-dimensional, whereas Hartman is given the priority and the prerogative to think, to analyze, to be judgmental, to want to remend things, to go back and do things this time better. But she is not given that. She is never angry. Look, this man just dumped her, just divorced her. She's going with him. She's not mad at him. He all the time tells her what to do. Don't go with them. We are going to talk about that in a minute. Let's go and eat. Let's go back to the inn, etc., etc. She is like a puppet. The story keeps shifting from one perspective to another, from Hartman to the wife. From Hartman to the wife, who listens all the time. She's listening, and she's feeling. With him, it's very rare that he feels, but he will feel all of a sudden in the story. There are many, many literary devices in this story, like dramatic elements. She, we start with a she. We are going to read it in a minute. She came out. We don't know who it is. The she. We are going to learn later on that her name is Tony. She comes out. And the story is built more like a play with directions or instructions from the director. Now you'll come out. Now these two men will go to you, etc., etc. So we have dramatic elements. We have allusions to the sources. We are going to talk about that. We just saw the allusion to the get, bill of divorcement. We are going to see a lot of use of gestures. Instead of telling us what a person feels, we are going to look at their hands or eyes and learn from that. Or the way she is going to use the parasol. There are many, many nonverbal elements, and there are many allusions to the sources. I already said that. And there is some juxtapositions between city and country life, and Hartman is more city person, Tony is more country life person, and we have the flowers in Tony's hands and thorns for Hartman. We have the birds, that Tony is like a bird, that's the analogy, and we have the cricket that appears at the end, and we have frogs. And we have a dream. Remember, it's Freudian time, and he's taken by him. In a later story, he's going to say, people like Freud really destroy our lives. And then we have, this is very, very unique for Agnon. We have erotic allusions. He almost never has them. This is one story that is full of them. And then we have evocation of all the senses in the story and a very ambiguous ending. Will they get together or will they not get together? Who thinks they will get together? Who thinks they won't? Okay. She didn't like him. Okay, let's see. Okay. Now the story is composed, there are several key questions that the story raises. First, in 1932, to show there are such differences that you can't bridge over was something very, very new. And it's much before Women from Venus and Men from Mars. And he says in this story that gender differences are huge. They are unbridgeable. That's what he's telling us, really. Tony is very different from Hartman. It's very, I would say that the story is very stereotyped in many ways, but we shall discuss that later on. The story also deals with the problem of separation and unity, the eternal quest for unity, of being together with a woman, with a family, but still the strong need to have time for yourself. And the difference between a man who needs the separation between business and home, and the woman who is more, how would you put it, integrative in nature. She likes to integrate things where he likes to compartmentalize. Yeah, good, thank you. Okay. Now there is also a deterministic view or optimistic view here. Are we capable of breaking away from old patterns and starting something new? Or are we doomed by our nature? Is Hartman going to be Hartman, hard man, all his life? Or is he, the English story is wrong because his name in the Hebrew version is Süßenstein, a sweet stone. He became only a stone. Where he started was a sweet person. Can Hartman shed the layer of stone from himself and become the sweet person he used to be? Or is he doomed to be the difficult, hard, not outgoing person? What's going to happen? Okay? Okay, the story is divided into 9 chapters. They can be grouped into 4 groups. The first part is the divorce is final. We meet Tony and Hartman. The exes are working together after the divorce. Readers learn about Hartman and what led to the divorce. And we know that because he used to separate between business and home, the divorce had to take place. The second part, they are in transition. Tony and Hartman are walking through the field. There is sunset. Hartman realizes the mistakes he made in his marriage, and they both remember childhood. Agnon and Freud, of course, they remember childhood. And a young couple appears, and the air is filled with desires. And we ask ourselves, will they or will they not? The third part is in the garden. They are going to have some good meal. They are going to eat. And Hartman is going to tell Tony his dream. And then the fourth part where they are back in the inn because there is no way back to the city. And they go to sleep, each one in a separate room. Tony is going to sleep in the wedding room alone. And Hartman is going to be put on the billiard table because he's like a ball. Whatever drives him, drives him. And whatever pit he's going to fall into, he'll fall into. Okay, now we're going to look more carefully into the different parts of the story. Okay, Tony comes out of the Beit Din of the rabbinic court, her bill of divorcement in hand, and her eyes are moist. Remember that only a man can initiate the debt. And what we get here is that she didn't want the divorce because she's crying. And it was all Hartman's desire. And as she comes out, two men come to her, which means that she was well thought of by men, and that she was considered even a prize, a trophy for men. And as she comes out with the two men, Hartman says to her, "Are you going to go with them?" Let's read it. Okay. Who would like to read? We are just at the opening of the story. You don't have? At the beginning. There are more here somewhere.
I have more copies. If you don't have one, raise your hand, I'll come over to you. 16 pages. Oh, yeah.
Start at the beginning, or did you want to start at the beginning? Willie? Yes, from the very beginning. You want to read?
She was wearing a brown dress, and her warm brown eyes were moist. As she came out of the rabbi's house with the bill of divorcement in her hand, she found fair-haired, you say it, Schwirsch?
What does this mean?
I don't know, and I looked up Google, but I couldn't find. So I spoke to somebody who said to me that it means a cricket, but I'm not so sure it's true. Okay.
And Dr. Tenser waiting for her, two bachelors who had been friendly with her since the first year of her marriage. Through the tears on her lashes, she could see how overjoyed they were. Not even in their dreams had they pictured the happy day when Tony Hartman would be parted from her husband. They both sprang eagerly forward and clasped her hands. Then Schwirsch took the parasol, hung it from her belt, and taking both her hands in his, swung them affectionately back and forth. Next, Tenser took them in his large, clammy hands and gazed at her with the cold, furtive look of a sensualist who is uncertain of his pleasures. Tony withdrew her tired hands from them both and wiped her eyes.
We have here a play on eyes and hands, which really characterize everybody in this first paragraph. Tony is tired. One of the men is eager, waiting for her. Her eyes are tired. She is crying. She is very emotional. Okay? Now, could you continue, Willie?
Schwirsch took her arm in his and prepared to accompany her. Tenser stationed himself on her right and thought, that albino has got in first, but never mind, if it's him today, it'll be me tomorrow. And he derived a kind of intellectual satisfaction from the thought that tomorrow he would be walking with Tony, who had been Hartman's yesterday and who is Schwirsch's today.
Please continue. Now, we met she. She came out, and we know it's Tony. Now we're going to meet him.
As they were about to go, Hartman emerged from the rabbi's house. His face was lined and his forehead furrowed. For a moment he stood there, looking about him like someone who has just come out of the dark and is wondering which way to go. Catching sight of Tony with the two men, he looked at her with his hard, tired eyes. Going with them, he asked. Tony lifted her veil to her forehead and said, "Don't you want me to?" Her voice sent a tremor through him. He linked his thumbs, one in the other, and said, "Don't go with them." Tony crumpled her handkerchief in her hand, raised her sad eyes, and stood looking at him helplessly. Her entire appearance seemed to say, "Do I look as if I could go alone?"
Okay. Let's go to Left Alone with Tony on the bottom of the page.
Left alone with Tony, Hartman made as if to take her arm, but desisted, so that she should not feel his agitation. For a moment or two they stood silently together. The whole business of the divorce had suddenly become very real, as if they were still standing in front of the rabbi, and the old man's bleeding voice were still ringing in their ears. Tony gripped her handkerchief tightly and checked her tears with an effort. Hartman removed his hat for relief. "Why are we standing here?" he asked himself. Once again he heard the bleeding in his ears, not the rabbi's voice, but that of the scribe, who had read out the bill of divorce, and he thought there was a mistake in it. Why was the wretched man in such a hurry? Because Tony and the whole thing was so strange. But as Hartman could not define exactly what it was that was so strange, he became confused. He felt he must do something. He crumpled his hat and waved it about. Then he smoothed out the creases, crumpled it again, put his hat back on his head, and passed his hands over his face from temples to chin. He could feel the stubble on his face. In his preoccupation with the divorce, he had forgotten to shave. What a disgusting sight I must look to Tony, he thought.
I guess it should say something like, Ausgerichtet net heute.
Today, of all days, he muttered between his teeth.
It's as if Agnon is saying to whoever is going to play this play, to be part of the play, now use the handkerchief, now use the hat, now put it on, now fold the creases, now unfold them, now look serious, now look sad, etc., etc. And don't speak, just use gestures, because they hardly talk here. The hands talk, the hat talks. He does that and he says, why today of all days did I forget to shave? Now Tony is not going to want me. But why should she want you? I mean, you just divorced her. Throughout the story, he doesn't even ask himself, will she take me back? Does she want me? He's so sure that she will. It's so one-sided throughout the story. Another thing that would be interesting to note is that he doesn't dare touch her. Swersh and Tenser go to her, hold her arms, hold her hands, but he's there. He's afraid to touch her. And throughout the story, this is going to happen time and again. He's going to caress her shadow. He's not going to touch her. He wants to, but he does not. He thinks one thing and he says something else. He feels one thing, but he doesn't act that way. Yes?
But you just finished saying that it's for squirrely.
Yeah.
So why should you want to? Why should you touch it then? If you don't want to. The terms of the get are that he shouldn't touch it.
Yeah, but he wants to go to bed with her at the end of the story. So these are the terms, yes? Yes. Okay. Next one. Hartman asks her not to go with these two men. The couple starts walking together. Suddenly, he starts talking. This man, who hardly ever speaks, starts telling his wife for 10 years, whom he hardly ever communicated with, especially not about his business. By the way, in the first version, Agnon says that Tony gives him advice about how to run his business. And he says to her, that's a good idea. He takes it out in the second version. I wonder why. Did his readers tell him it was too bold to say something like that? I really don't know. Because it's 80 years ago that he wrote this story. So I really don't know what made him change it, because it's so beautiful in the first version. Okay? And all of a sudden, he also grasps that this is final. This is real. We are separated. I divorced her, but I like her. So why did I divorce her? And she's smart. And she's listening. And she supports him. In the beginning like go alone, but later on he needs her support, her understanding, and she gives it to him. Okay. Now, the question arises, if he does so much introspection in the story, will he change? Will he have Panim Aherot, a new face? And if he does, isn't it too late? And the entire story in Hebrew has a play on 3 consonants, Acher and Meuchar and Oreach, which can't be translated into English. Another, guest and too late, which runs through the story in Hebrew. And of course, it can't be translated. Is it too late? Let's see. On their way, they meet a flower girl, flower vendor. And she has asters. I hope I pronounce it correctly. And these flowers, which you can see here, are the favorite flowers for Tony, and she put them on the grave of her mother, on her mother's grave. Now Tony Hartman buys the flowers. Do you? Please listen. Hartman buys the flowers. He gives the flower girl a coin. He pays for it. The girl doesn't move. Now this is the man. He doesn't know what to do. So he asks Tony, in Hebrew we would say, "Ma hi rotza ma'chaim sheli?" What does she want of me?
My life.
Of my life. What does she want? And Tony takes the flowers, she smells them, and she says to the girl, "Thank you." And the girl goes like that. She's happy. What's Hartman's reaction? She's a good merchant. If she gives merchandise, she should get something for that. Again, that's the unbridgeable. 2 views. Okay? Throughout the story, the couple is going to meet several other supporting actors, and they will shed more light on the 2 main characters in the story.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm still struggling with trying to understand why he's divorced her. I just
Okay,
can't
okay.
get it.
There is a passage in the story that says, at first, he would just kiss her and that's it. He always separated between life at home and life at work. He had a lot of troubles at work. And at first when she would ask him what was at work, he would just kiss her and say, maidele. Oh, little girl, don't ask. Later on, he just felt that he didn't find himself at home. Because when he would come home, his thoughts were about business. And he started smoking. And also, she had many friends. He didn't like her friends. She used to read novels, which he thought was nonsense. Everything, he belittled her very existence. He looked down on her. And the more she tried, the more separated they became. And then he started smoking. And he thought that smoking would burn his fears and thoughts. And later on, his agents and partners really cheated him. And instead of getting rid of the partners and the agents, he got rid of his wife. Because the man makes mistakes, and that's allowed. And he can introspect, and he's going now to understand what happened. But does that mean that he's going to change? Is knowing changing? That's a big question that Agnon is asking. Because maybe we know what we should do. Do we do the right thing then? I wish I did. Anyways, he starts seeing his affairs, his business affairs, in a new light. Panim Aherot, the metamorphosis here. Though he is not exactly one thing, but he wants to say something else. That's what Agnon tells us all the time about him. And yet, she understands him. She can relate to what he is saying, even though he is not saying what he wants to say. סליחה. Another thing that we have to remember is that he didn't come from a wealthy family, and she didn't come from a wealthy family. He did it all with his own hands, with his 10 fingers. And he is very, very worried about material and monetary things, which she is less preoccupied with. And that's another difference, huge difference between them. They have 2 children, by the way, if you remember, Renate and what's the other name? Beate and Renate. One is 9 and one is 7. And when the problems at home start, the 2 girls are sent to their aunt in the country. It's Tony's aunt. And remember, Tony is a country girl. Hartman symbolizes city life. They are not there to witness everything that is going on between the parents. Okay. Tony is listening, and the writer tells us, the author, we have an all-knowing author. He knows what the couple is thinking. He knows what happened to them in the past. He knows everything. And this narrator tells us that what Tony didn't grasp with her mind, her heart understood. And she is the one who is more sensitive, more attentive, and willing to accept Hartman with all his shortcomings. Hartman sees Tony all of a sudden in a new light. He looked at her as he hasn't looked at her for a long time past. And he beheld her as he hadn't beheld her for a long time past. And of course, we are asking, so why did you divorce her? And if you did, would you like to get together again? And if you want to, isn't it too late? How does she feel about it? And there is a key sentence that we are going to go to later on. But what was good for him was not good for her. And that's the key sentence of the entire story. We're going to come to that later on. And it might be too late. We are going to talk later on, will they or will they not? We are going to see why yes, and we are going to see why not. We are going to see why maybe. Okay? Let's go.
Was this made into a movie? Or?
No. It's I made this
Oh,
no, it's my movie.
right.
No, but it should. And it is also made into a play because it's very easy to make it into a play. Now, they are in transition. They are moving from the city into the country. They are walking. And as they are walking, he is talking all the time. She's listening. He wants to touch her, but he touches her shadow. He wants to caress her, he caresses the shadow. They are in the field. The sun is about to set. Stars are appearing. Hartman stretches his hand out into the vacant air and caresses Tony's shadow. Once again, he extended his hand and caressed the air. There is a strong smell of the countryside. Tony takes out a bottle of perfume. It's very important for the rest of the story. And she sprinkles it over her hands. Remember, movement, smell, evocation of all the senses. We are going to see, we are going to smell, we are going to hear everything. There are birds, there are frogs. Tony is afraid of everything. A frog jumps, Tony jumps. A child runs with a match in his hand with a torch. She's frightened. She's crying. She remembers. Okay. Hartman starts to understand the mistakes he made in his marriage. He is very judgmental. He was judgmental of Tony. He's judgmental of himself now. He knows what went wrong. If he hadn't snapped at her every time she wanted, this is your question, wanted to know something about his doings, they wouldn't have come to regard themselves as such strangers to one another. There is a change starts. Michael in English, Michael could not see Tony's eyes, but he felt, the first time in the story, Michael felt. A child runs with a torch. A man lights a lamp. A young couple appears. They are behind, one is behind Tony, one is behind Hartman. This is what Tony and Hartman used to be in the past, a young couple. The air is unfulfilled, is fulfilled with, is filled, sorry. The whole air became charged with unfulfilled desires. Will they or will they not? Okay. They are going now. Hartman says to his wife, you know, I can see a light over there. It's flickering. It's an inn. It's a restaurant. Let's go there. And they go, and there is a garden. There is a garden. They are going back to the Garden of Eden. It's just them two. No children. The children are with the aunt. No one. Just a man and a woman. Back to where it all began. And they are going to have a meal to eat. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. And there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge, good and evil. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden. And from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. And the Lord God said, it is not good that a man should be alone. I will make him and help meet for him. And Tony is the help for Hartman. Does he realize that? Yes, he does. Finally, after he divorced her. And 2 men were waiting for her. Don't forget. It's the male jealousy. She's not going to go alone. If you let her go, people are waiting for her. And he says to her, are you going to walk with them? And they are no good. Tenser and Swersh. All they want is a woman that somebody else wanted. And what about you, my dear Hartman? And all the time, he sees other women. As they walk out of the rabbinical court, he sees a woman in the window. And as they walk into the garden, he sees another woman. Can they start afresh? Can Hartman stop being attracted to other women? He wants Tony, but still he says there is a girl there, a plump girl that is cleaning the vegetables. And he says, she must be freckled. She must be this and she must be that. Well, give your attention to the one you want. And as they walk into the garden, let's see, they are hungry. So they go to the garden in the rural inn to eat. The garden is darkened. There is a satisfying meal. There is a sensual-looking kitchen girl that Hartman looks at, but he can't see. He feels, he senses it. The casual smoking of cigarettes, all these build up expectations of erotic fulfillment. Yes, please.
Can you interpret that picture? I see one figure, what is the other figure?
It's a man and a woman. That's all. It doesn't matter. It's something that I found on the internet. It's just to make the presentation more alive, more colorful. That's all. Okay? Doesn't matter. It's not that important. Okay? So they go into the restaurant in the garden, and they ask the waiter to bring them food. And what does the waiter say to them? Let's see that. Are we?
123.
Yeah. 122, please. A waiter came up, wiped the top of the table, spread a cloth on it, and handed them a menu. Then he fetched a glass of water and put the flowers in it, and stood waiting until they were ready with their order. Hartman saw that most of the dishes listed in the menu had been struck out. He grumbled, most of the dishes have already been eaten up. Looking over Hartman's shoulder, the waiter said, I'll bring you some others immediately. Ani avi acherim, Panim Aherot. Again, I'll bring something different. And here is one of the literary devices that I spoke about, the analogy between things in Agnon's work. The dishes, the food is analogical to their life, to their marriage. It's over. It's like the menu. The menu had marriage, struck out. I'll bring you something different. So, but they are going to get a good meal. They are going to drink wine. Hartman is going to drink wine. It's very important, the wine in this case. And we are waiting for Adam to know his wife. And Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and had a son. Now, as they are sitting there, the person who never discusses anything opens his mouth and doesn't stop. Hartman is telling Tony a dream. And he says to her, I want to tell you a dream. And she's shocked and she says, a dream? You hardly talk to me. Now you're going to tell me your inner feelings, your inner thoughts? And the dream is divided into parts. The first part is somewhere in Berlin, a specific part, and the other part is in another part of Berlin. Okay? There are three figures in the dream. There is Hartman himself. There is Sissenschein, but in the Hebrew version, Sissenstein. I don't know why they translated it and changed the name. A sweet stone who had just returned from Africa. The three figures in the dream are all Hartman, and we are going to talk about that. Are three different aspects of his nature. The first one is the one that goes to Africa, adventurous. Adventurous and something not yet cultivated, not fully westernized. Yeah? And he likes that person. And then there is a young man whom he dislikes immediately, part of himself, that he's very judgmental and critical of. And the dream is about getting an apartment for Sissenschein or Sissenstein. But later on, as the dream unfolds, we find that it's about Hartman getting a new apartment. You're going to read it in a minute. We realize that Hartman is going to get a new wife, because in our sources, you remember, there is a layer always of the sources. Rabbi Yehuda says, and he shall atone himself and for his household. His household is his wife. In our sources, apartment or household is the wife. And that's why Agnon is talking about a new apartment, a new wife. Okay? Let's go on with the In the first version of the story, as I told you, in 1932, Agnon says specifically that he attributes what he's writing about the dream to Freud. In the second version, this doesn't exist. What Agnon said, that he doesn't like to incorporate into his Jewish writings something that is not from the sources, but that's not true. That's a lame excuse which he made. Anyways, Agnon is an author that he's playing with with his readers. And he has a very, very strange sense of humor. And he might be making fun of Freud in this story with all the symbols like parasol and hat and the dream itself, God knows, because he was very critical of Freud. So I really don't know. That's what Baal is saying. Maybe, maybe not. Let's read the dream, okay? And the dream is, where is it? We are
125.
125, yeah. I need your help with that. Please.
In this dream, I was living in Berlin. In this dream, I was living in Berlin. I.Schen came to visit me. You remember I.Schen? At the time, he had just returned from Africa. I'm always glad to see him, for he brings with him an atmosphere of the far-off places I used to dream of in my childhood. But that day I wasn't glad. Perhaps it was because he came in the morning, when I liked to sit by myself. Perhaps it was because in dreams we aren't always happy to be with the people we enjoy when we're away. He had someone else with him, a young man to whom I took a violent dislike the instant he walked in. He acted as if he had wearied himself with I.Schen and all his travels. But for I.Schen's sake, I treated him civilly. Are you listening? I'm listening, Tony whispered, as if afraid that the sound of her voice would interrupt the story. Hartman continued. Tony walked on.
I.Schen looked around at my flat. Please.
I looked around at my flat and said, if I found a flat like yours, I'd take it. I want to stay here a while, and I'm tired of hotels. I replied, I've heard of a very nice flat that's going in Charlottenburg. To which he rejoined, all right, let's go there. Wait, I suggested. Let me phone up first. No, he said, we'll go there straight away, and I went along with him.
Please continue. We still have, yeah.
All right, Tony nodded. Hartman went on. When we got there, the landlady was nowhere to be seen. I wanted to tell him off for being so impulsive, but I stopped myself, as my temper was very frayed, and I felt I was in danger of going too far. His companion urged the maid to go and call the landlady. The maid looked at him suspiciously, or maybe she just looked at him without any particular expression. But I hated him so much that I thought she looked at him with suspicion. As she went, the landlady came in. She was dark, neither young nor old, on the short side, eyes a trifle filmy, and one leg shorter than the other, though this did not seem like a blemish in her. On the contrary, she seemed to dance along rather than walk. A secret joy twinkled on her lips, a hidden, yearning joy, a virginal joy.
Continue.
Although Hartman was aware that Tony was listening with interest, he nevertheless asked, are you listening, Tony? And went on. The rooms she showed us were very nice, but I.Schen turned away from them and said, I wouldn't advise you to take this flat. Winter is approaching, and there is no stove. I can't read anymore.
Okay. I gazed at him in astonishment. Who was it that wanted to rent a flat? I or he? I have a fine one of my own. I'm very pleased with it. All of a sudden he's pleased with it. And I have no intention of exchanging it for another. I.Schen repeated, a place without a stove. A place without a stove. If I were you, I wouldn't take it. Here the landlady put in, but there is a stove. But this Schen interrupted her. Where is the stove? In the bedroom? But the study, madame, is all of glass. Are you looking for somewhere to live? Or for an observatory from which to view the frozen birds? His words depressed me so much that I began to feel cold. I looked around and saw that the study did indeed consist more of windows than of walls. I nodded and said, "That's so." The landlady looked at me with her filmy but charming eyes and straightened herself with a caper. I turned away from her and thought, how shall I ever get away from this cold? My skin was already clinging to my bones. I woke up and found that the blanket had slipped off my bed. Now, he says later on, when Tony, he thinks that if Tony gets up, he'll see that she also has a limp. Now, the landlady there is really Tony. And she shows him through the house. And she has some problem or some defect, but he still likes her. She's very erotic, she's very sensual, she's very attractive. But at home, there is no love. There is sex. In the bedroom, there is a stove. But otherwise, throughout the house, there is nothing. No love, no warmth, no stove. Freud, 1932. Okay? It's a very Freudian dream. So, let's continue now. They have eaten. They just drank. They are satisfied. He is telling her a dream in which he's telling her that he likes his apartment, that he doesn't want to move out of that apartment, and he doesn't understand why he is dreaming of a new apartment. Panim Aherot, a new face. Why did I divorce? That's what he is asking all the time. Himself and Tony understands. And the waiter is telling them it's too late, and they have to leave the place. They're going back. No way back. No bus. No telephone booth to call a taxi. Tony is very tired. Hartman says to Tony, you know what? They probably, in that inn, they probably have a room for us. We could stay there the night. And since it's so late and you are so tired, he's all of a sudden so sensitive to her needs. He cares for her. He really worries about her. But is this going to last? Okay, it's late, there is no way back. Tony is too tired. He suggests that they go back to the inn. Okay. Entering the inn, the innkeeper is not pleased, that's an understatement, to see a couple who had turned up after midnight to seek a haven of love. The old innkeeper is analogous to the Jewish rabbi. And remember, a couple after a divorce shouldn't be together. And we know, for according to the Talmud, if a wife who had been divorced happened to pass the night in the same inn with her former husband, she needs another bill of divorce according to the school of Hillel. There are two schools. The school of Shammai says she doesn't need a second divorce. The school of Hillel says she needs a second divorce if she spent the night in an inn with her former husband. And here we have the innkeeper is a Jewish rabbi or a godly figure that says, no, you just divorced and I'm from the school of Hillel. You can't stay together. You can't stay together. I'm going to put you in the wedding room and your husband, your ex-husband, on on the billiard table because you are not allowed to be together. And your ex-husband is like a yo-yo or a ball, and whoever shoves him, that's it. He's being pushed. Let's go on. Tony is sleeping alone in her wedding room. He gives her, they are shaking hands, if you remember. Finally, he's touching her, but just to shake hands and saying good night. Hartman goes out. He climbs a mound. He's looking at the thorns and counting them and saying to himself, before I say what he's saying to himself, remember, she had flowers. The flowers also grew on her mother's grave. And these are modest flowers like Tony. They are beautiful. They are modest and they grow everywhere. They don't need too much cultivation. He is going out. He just left his ex-wife, whom he loves all of a sudden again. He's going out. He wants to smoke, but then he looks at the thorns. What are you doing, Hartman? Do you always turn flowers into thorns? And then he realizes, he says to himself, I wonder if the gardener, and he's the gardener, doesn't lavish more care on the thorns than on the flowers. Does he understand the analogy? Does he understand that he is the one who takes thorns more, makes thorns more important in his life than flowers? And the gardener, he says, plants them in the wrong places. Okay, let's go on. Hartman goes to sleep on the billiard table. Before that, he remembers that as he was young, he fell from a little hill, a mound, and it was very sweet. And he's not afraid of falling anymore because he knows that if you fall, nothing really happens. Now he's thinking about his wife. He's listening. He wants her even to cry, even to ask for something. Let's read the last paragraph of the story. And then we are going to decide whether they are going to get together or not. Could someone help me? 1, 3, 4. He's still.
He still thought of Tony critically, as he always had. But now he felt that all those shortcomings in no way detracted from her. With a sweet feeling of adoration, he summoned up her face, that wonderful face. But then it began to fade away from him, against his will. How thin her shoulders were, but her figure was that of a pretty girl. Hartman embraced the air with his arm and felt himself blushing. As he was talking to himself, he heard a sort of moan. Since he was thinking about his wife, it seemed to him that the sound came from her room. He opened his eyes and, lifting his head, listened intently. Help me, O Lord, help me. Has anything happened? In reality, he could have heard nothing, for there was a thick wall between them. Nor was it a moan of distress he had heard. Nevertheless, he sat upright on his bed in case he should hear anything, in case anything of her vital being should reach his ears. Perhaps he might be able to help her. Once again she appeared before him the way she had looked that day, lifting her veil onto her forehead, raising the asters to her face, digging her parasol into the ground, parting the cigarette smoke with her fingers. Gradually the parasol vanished, the smoke dispersed, and the asters grew more numerous until they covered the whole mound. Astonished and puzzled, he gazed in front of him. As he did so, his eyes closed. His head dropped on the pillow. His soul fell asleep, and his spirit no partition separated them.
Will it be only in the world of dreams or in reality? Will they or will they not? Now, okay, next one. Why yes? Because Agnon in another story called A Guest for the Night says, I said to him, there is this man Hartman, it's another story, who one day gave his wife a bill of divorcement. But as soon as they left the rabbi's house, his love for her was reawakened and he took her back. So that's why yes. But Agnon is a writer that plays with us. So he might say this here and something else in another one. Let's continue. Why yes? Because Hartman has undergone a process of deep introspection. He's aware of the mistakes he has made, realizes he needs to mend his approach, separating business and home, and unite the two. Because Hartman has become aware of Toni as a person and caters to her needs. Because he sees Toni in a new positive light, Panim Aherot, in spite of all her flaws. Like the landlady. She might have a limp, but she is very attractive. Because he is attracted again to Toni, but he's attracted to other women as well. Okay, let's see next. Why not? Because there is no way back. Most of the dishes have already been eaten. I'll bring you some others. Acherim, immediately. He looked around to see if he could find a conveyance to take them back to the town, but there is no way back. But the earth was silent, no sound of carriage, wheel or motor, but the city was far away. Next, why not? Why not? Because even though Hartman seems to be much more attentive to Toni, and he keeps introspecting and criticizing himself, Panim Aherot, Metamorphosis, when he reminisces, whatever, about falling from the mount, he realizes, and I'm reading from the story, strange, all the while I was standing on the mound, I thought only about myself. As though I were alone in the world, separation and unity, remember. As though I did not have two daughters, as though I did not have a wife. He was ashamed, and once more, he became concerned with himself. Next, why not? Why not? Because there is a deterministic point of view in the story. Because things have already been decided. The landlord, the Jewish judicial figure, instead insists on putting Hartman and Toni with an I, not one, in separate rooms. Because Hartman is like a ball and he can't escape his nature. Because only in his dreams there is no partition. His soul fell asleep and his spirit began to hover in the world of dreams, where no partition separated them. In the world of dreams. Next. Why not? Why not? Because throughout the story, Agnon scatters allusions to the Havdalah ceremony. Havdalah ceremony is the separation between what is holy and what is not holy. The Havdalah service marks the end of Shabbat or holidays and the separation between the holy and the weekdays. We are going to find it here. Just a minute. 3 things are needed for this ritual. A glass of wine or other liquids, some fragrant spices, and a special Havdalah candle. Next. The ceremony should be performed no earlier than nightfall on Saturday night. Nightfall is the time when 3 stars can be seen in the sky. Next. Okay. Havdalah components in the story. Stars. You can look at page 119. High up in the sky, there was a tiny star. Behind it, another star made its way through the clouds and began shining, and other stars followed, fragrance and spices, and the smell of burnt weeds. Light. A little boy ran past holding a burning torch. Fragrance. Toni opened her handbag, took out a bottle of scent, and sprinkled her hands with it. Next. Candle. The landlord got up and lit a candle. Finally, he gave him a lit candle and a box of matches and left the room. He extinguished the candle. Now we are going to listen to Hamavdil. I'll give those who don't know this is just a song of the Havdalah. Not the Havdalah. I don't have for everybody, so okay. We are not going to listen to all of it, just part. This is not a blessing, it's just the song. Okay? Okay, we are going to stop here. We are going to stop here. We are not finished yet. But what I'm trying to say is, you remember that in Agnon's work there is always another strata, another layer, an undercurrent of the sources, and we have the lies there. And that's why I can say maybe no, or very maybe no. Now, the key sentence that he left in both versions, thank God he left it, because otherwise she is really a puppet. It was good, he felt, that Tony existed for him in this world and at that hour. But what was good for him was not good for her. And that's, excuse me?
I think it was good for her eventually to get back with him. I felt that it was good for the family, for even for her. She didn't love anyone else. Maybe he'll change.
Could we wait I need just 2 minutes more before I'll let you discuss, and then we are going to do something else. Okay, and I'll let you talk about that. Gadi, next. And what do the critics say? Well, we have Zimmerman, Balaban, Goldberg, and myself, no. Barzel and Halperin and Vogel, yes. Sternberg, Perry, Gollum, Band, maybe. Because Agnon is playing with the reader, for he scatters clues, enabling both possibilities throughout the entire story. So it's an open-ended story. Now, what do you think? I have something else to show you, but that's more or less. Okay. Yes.
What I took from this was the battered women syndrome. And this is the first and the earliest attempt that I've read about it with a lot of Judaic undertones to it. And it's a terrific story from that standpoint.
Well, I think that Hartman is very impulsive. I think he got this divorce just on an impulse.
He's on the billiard table.
Yeah, and I think he also feels like maybe he still loves her, and he's going back to her impulsively. I think.
Yeah, I'm curious. She doesn't seem as cloistered as we talk about. She had these two bachelor friends that the friendship started in her beginning of her marriage. It's not addressed, but it certainly shows her as having a larger worth.
Yeah, but he says in the story that she had a lot of friends, and he despised her for that, for having so
bachelors.
Yeah, and they were waiting for her. 10 years.
And women who just get married, it's hard usually to have two bachelor friends.
But he was never
with
home.
her husband.
He was never home. Yeah.
He never lets her into the story. She never says anything.
Right.
So
In the first version,
nobody ever
yeah.
will.
Yeah. In the first version, he did a lot. Yes, please.
I have a feeling that he lives, I know he started, the divorce was his action, but I sense a massive passivity when it comes to acting, even though he's supposed to have been
But
the
he
actor.
always feels he has to do something.
No, he has to think about doing something, that's
Yeah.
different.
that most men were like that. I mean, we're talking about a time where men at that era were, all I can think of is macho. You know, they ruled the household in a sense, not raising the children, but that's the way they were.
This was the 30s, this was the time of the women coming.
Yeah.
Women were coming out of themselves.
Right.
And had possibilities. If you think of flappers, it's just beyond that time. Even their clothing no longer inhibited them. It was shorter, not the long hobbled skirt, so that we can go back and do visuals, women becoming more emancipated and not so downtrodden. She'd be a moron.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
I also think that it was a time when, he doesn't communicate at all, and he didn't at home. And there probably, that was more common than we think. Men did not want her to be burdened with the problems, and it was, that was his business to support them, and she was home. And so I think there's more to it than just, communication.
I think a history of strong women who helped their husbands and very often did the business while the husband studied. So, there's two traditions, I think, more.
I would like to end our session not with this story, but with a poem written by a very, very famous Israeli writer, David Avidan, which is called Harei at muteret lechol adam. You are hereby free to any man. And it's the story of a divorce between two partners who loved each other a lot. And I translated it myself because I couldn't find a translation. And you'll get it here in Hebrew and in English. So please, and we are going to watch the video. Those who speak Hebrew, you could take the Hebrew first. It has also the English, but the Hebrew comes first. And yeah, I'll take it here. Please. Please. And what he says is he said, she said, and that's how the divorce occurred. Okay? So.
Does the rabbi ask why they're getting divorced? I've never been in one of these. Do they have to explain to the rabbi, or does he just give it?
First of all, according to Jewish law, you are given 3 months for shlom bayit. But here they are not given.
That means to have peace in the house.
Yeah. And also to make sure that she's not pregnant. It's to make sure that she's not pregnant. That's why they are given 3 months. And yeah, really. Yeah.
I see 3 reasons why they can come together, that they will come together. One, that she chose to go with him and not with them, and she really didn't want the divorce. Second, the whole relationship in their conversation changed, altered the whole separation thing, and it is contradictory to the Avdala idea. The third one is because when they parted to sleep, I don't remember exactly. I read it, and I remember that she actually, there was a certain tendency of them not to part. It was mutual. She didn't. It felt like there was something in there.
There is emotion, of course.
Yeah, there was this. They were unseparated spiritually. This was. And the last one is because when he when the text says that he hears, he imagines that he hears a very a moan, almost unnoticeable through the wall, and there is a wall. So I mean, it is just the opposite of everything. He can be so sensitive to her now that he can hear something that almost is not there beyond a thick wall, which means that there is a transformation.
Will it last? That's the point. Okay, but let's, since we have to finish, then I would like you to look at the poem and...
Was there anything to do with Kafka's title?
No. None whatsoever. You can read the words, and here is...
במשך חודשים ושנים יש ביניהם אהבה וחיפה ואיבה וסכינים והם ישנים לשעות הקטנות על צמיחות בלי סדינים אלא הם ילדים והם ישנים כמו ילדים קטנים הקירות צורכים עליהם והקרה רוחשת עננים יש אלוהים בשמיים אחר יום חדש אנשים משתנים יהיה טוב, יהיה רע עניינים עדינים החיים שם מחליט יצרה חומרים מילהם הביולוגים מתערבבים וישנו גם מוזר בחדרים והם עוברים מחדר לחדר ולא מסתדרים לא עם עצמם ולא זה עם זו ולא עם אחרים אבל הם חולו זה לזו ואז הם מחוברים ושני שופרות נתקעים בחלון כמו זוג ציפורים צעירות ילדים הקיץ חלף הלילות כבר קרים אדם ואישה חיים לבדם ואין להם ילדים והיא בודדה שניהם מולדים היא סוברת סרבויות ומסמכים היא סוברת בגדים והם ביניהם מלמים בידוד והם משוקעים וברגע מסוים די ספור מראש הם נפרדים חיים שם שנתיים בתוך דירה עם ריהוט מאולתר ואימה עתיקה וללא בשורה גבר חיים נשאר בדירה סגורה ואוהב אותה והיא אותו הוא אמר היא אמרה אבל אני בשמיים ואין אלוהים בסביבה עכשיו העניין נשבר ושני שופרות בחלון נחבטים כמו זוג יובי בר מה שהיה היה מה שעבר עבר הרי את מוזרת
There was a TV sitcom in Hebrew with three single girls and three single guys. Do you know which one I'm thinking of? Okay, it was on television.
Oh, was it,
One was a dumb blonde and one was a...
I really don't know. I rarely watch television. Sorry.
Yeah,
I know
it
it's
was
I really don't know. Anyways, make excuse.
So do you remember that one of the boys got involved with, he was divorced, and then he got involved with one of the girls, and then he had spent a night with his wife, and he had to get a second
Divorce. Okay. We have wrapped up the story. What I would like you to do is go home and decide for yourselves whether they are going to get together again or not, or maybe. Thank you very much.